What is up, everybody? And thank you so much for tuning in to episode 13 of The Trainer Scoop, a podcast dedicated to helping individuals passionate about fitness improve in life and lifting. And I think you all are really going to enjoy and get a lot out of this episode. I know on our end, making this episode happen, it wasn't the easiest thing. We had to deal with some Wi-Fi. We had to deal with, the after effects of a hurricane. It was pretty much like its own version of like the Odyssey, like that ancient Greek epic poem of our struggle to get this podcast off the ground. But I'm really excited to bring you guys Devon Bennett, who is a fitness nutrition coach and the man behind a very successful Instagram page, if I don't say for myself, which is Plant Fueled Strength. So definitely check him out on Instagram. Do that right now while you have your phone out. And yeah, guys, for real, I'm really excited about this episode. I think it's going to be one of the most educational conversations I've had. And I think because Devon, has kind of built a brand around nutrition from a plant-based lifestyle point of view, that it's going to be very educational for all the listeners as well. But Devon, say what's up to the people, man.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Hope everyone's doing well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you once again for making time to come on, Devon. I know
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
crazy, but we made it happen. So yeah, just to get into
Yep.
a little bit of your background, how did you kind of get into living like a fit and active lifestyle?
Yeah. So, I transitioned to plant-based lifestyle a little bit before I transitioned into really start taking my fitness seriously. My transition into a plant-based diet actually started 4 years ago, whereas my transition into, fitness really didn't start until 2 years after that. So I've been into fitness and nutrition from a health perspective for about the last 2 years. And my main, venue for, spreading information on that has been my page at Plant Field Strength. And so I was an athlete in high school, but this was the real reason I started taking it, to the next level was because I wanted to vouch for plant-based eating, and I actually found fitness was a great way to. It was a great vessel to encourage people to be open to it and try it out. So it's a little bit of a different way of getting into it.
Yeah, for sure. So we were talking briefly before I started recording that we both recently graduated. So you said then 4 years ago you started the plant-based lifestyle. So was that right around the time when you started college? Is when that kind of kicked off?
No, actually, it was a little bit into college. I think I was in my third year of college, actually, by the time that I had transitioned into a vegan diet. I was in college for 5 years because of a major switch. And so it was my third year of college that I adopted a vegan diet. And it wasn't until right at the end before I graduated that I started, focusing around the fitness and nutrition around that diet. And, I wasn't a mechanical engineer major. I had nothing, my education was not anything to do with fitness or nutrition. It was a decision I had made before I really knew what I wanted to do. I discovered what I like to do a little bit late. So that's what happened. And, I actually even worked in mechanical engineering for 14 months before I got to this point where now I'm leaving my engineering job and just pursuing nutrition and fitness strictly.
Yeah. And I think it's always it's always very, it's a big leap, as we were discussing before as well, to kind of depart from the comfort of, I'm sure, you had a great job being an engineer, and then pursuing your passion and what you really felt called to do. So, so what did that look like? Was there any kickback from friends or family? Or because I feel like everybody loves that idea of like someone just departing from, maybe what you're not most happy doing to what you're really passionate about.
Yeah. So obviously my family, like I'm probably the majority of families, would rather me have a, take the most stable route. Even when I graduated from college in 2018, December 2018, I graduated from Georgia Tech. Um, I already knew I didn't want to work in engineering, but it was really that pressure from, my parents, and the fact that I just spent, all this time and money to get a mechanical engineering degree that made me feel pretty much obligated to get a job in engineering. And, I took that job, the first offer I got really, which was in May, um, to make my family satisfied that I was working in that. But at the same time that I got that job offer, I was hitting 10,000 followers on Instagram. I was starting to take off, and it was definitely difficult because I went from only 1,000 to 10,000 following in a very short period of time. I saw all the potential that I had with this, and at the same time I was settling for this comfortable, stable engineering job. But I didn't feel like I had much other option. So I did my best to keep the page growing steadily while I worked a 9 to 5 with an hour commute both ways. And that was rough. But I knew the entire time that I was working an engineering job that at some point, as soon as I possibly reasonably could, I was going to take this leap. So the entire time I was just living frugally and saving money. I mean, I lived with my parents for another extra 6 months, even after making an engineering salary, just so I would have a little bit of a financial cushion if I were to make such a decision. And yeah, I mean, I didn't even really warn my parents that I was going to, take that leap either. But at the end of the day, it's not really their lives. Our parents are there to, our parents and our friends are really, even though they love us, their main goal is our safety and security, not our fulfillment and happiness. It's not like their fault for that. It's just like the default for people who usually care about you, especially if they live their own lives from a position where they're more concerned about security. Of course, it's going to extend to everybody they care about. So, I don't blame my family for not being the most supportive. My sibling is, my sister is, but of course, my mom would rather me just get back into an engineering job, or at least something that's more steady and salary based. But the way I see it is, that's always there for me to fall back to. Thankfully, mechanical engineering doesn't advance that quickly in terms of the fundamentals you need to work that job. So, I have to take this leap now while I'm young, while I don't have restrictions, while, this is just the time to do it. And I'm following my gut. And yeah.
It's kind of just like one of those, like the Cinderella stories where you hear someone departing to do your own thing. There's definitely a saying for that. It's not coming to my mind right now.
Yeah.
So one thing right off the bat that I noticed about your Instagram page when we first connected is it just looks overall very aesthetic. And I think that's something that like I'm working toward. I feel like a lot of, fitness professionals and people that are trying to grow their brand could definitely take a page from your book. Was that something that was always in the back of your mind as you grew your page, or did that kind of evolve over time?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So yeah, I started off the page, really as I didn't have any really large term vision in that first couple months. I was just like, let me just do a fitness blog type page so I can share with family and friends and those who care, just my journey into fitness. It wasn't until I shared my first informational post that I realized that I shared my first informational post and the amount of engagement and likes was higher. And I realized that there was actually potential for growing this page into something bigger than just being about me. And that the way to do that was by providing value. And I did that through, just trying to take nice pictures and also using Canva and Photoshop and studying and getting feedback from people who, understand what looks aesthetic. I realized that basically that the best way to grow my page was that to give information, make it have value, and make sure that it actually looked good as well. Because Instagram is especially Instagram as a platform, which is the only platform I'm on currently. It's all about aesthetics. That's what Instagram is. It has to be eye-catching. In fact, I would say that being eye-catching and being aesthetic is almost, unfortunately, a little bit more important than the accuracy of the information.
For sure.
So yeah, but if anybody wants to grow their brand, I still think Instagram is a great way to do that. But you have to make sure that every post actually looks quality, and you have to make sure that every post is aesthetic and shareable. If you want to really take it to the next level.
Right. Yeah, man. I wish I would have ran into you like a year ago, because that's when I kind of started my Instagram page, and I felt like I was putting out some great content in terms of information, but it just didn't pop at all. Most of the time, it was just me talking into the front-facing camera and with no real thought into any of that. So it's cool to see that you went the extra step to make everything look appealing as well. I feel like you might have even been a little ahead of your time with that, which is like why it popped off so quick. Because
absolutely. A lot of people, watch, especially specifically in my niche, but it's probably in all the fitness niche combined. But in the vegan fitness niche, a lot of people who noticed my jump, I'm not saying it was just me, but any account that was doing things like me and they noticed that we were growing quickly, it caught on very quick. And then now infographics and similar posts became very mainstream, such that it's actually a little bit saturated now. Instagram is kind of saturated with this infographic content, which is why I'm trying to now figure out what the next thing that separates me from an infographic page is.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Dang, you're a trendsetter out here, man. No, I know exactly what you're talking about, though. You see some kind of ridiculous infographics from time to time, like foods that you should eat, and it's like eggs, and like it's like the classic food pyramid just re-envisioned into an Instagram graphic. So I think it's cool that you were able to take advantage of that and do it in a good way to help people out, though. That's really cool. Then what do you see as like the next differentiating factor for yourself?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things I've realized. Well, first of all, two things have changed, which is forcing me to have to probably change in the future right now. One is the fact that, like I just said, infographics are becoming saturated. So even though I do encourage people to use some level of infographics, it's still harder than it used to be to grow a page with infographics. There has to be something a little bit novel to the page. And the second thing is that Instagram's hashtag algorithm has changed such that it seems to not favor infographics as much as it used to. It still might. It really depends on the infographic. For some reason, tweets do very well now. Like if you see people like doing like they post on Instagram their tweets, the reason everyone's doing that is because for some reason, every time you do that, the hashtag just whatever they have in the hashtag algorithm is treating tweets very well. I think actual photos are doing a little bit better. But aside from that, what I need to do that I haven't been doing up to this point is have more of a personal touch on my page where I'm on it a little bit more, and also just more in-depth content. So I think that's the direction I'm going. Is I'm going to have more of me. In the next couple months, I'm actually going to be starting a YouTube channel, but I'll be using snippets of those YouTube channels for IGTV and posting those videos as well. So I'll be doing IGTV videos. I'll be doing a couple of more in-depth posts to separate me from the generic quick infographics. And I don't know. Other than that, we'll see. It's going to be a trial and error process. But at the core of it, I think I need to make my page more novel, and I need to make my page more relatable and connectable to me as a person, just so that I have a better engagement rate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, man. There's a lot to unpack there. And I feel like a lot of people have the opposite issue where like all their page is novel. And I feel like they could stand to have a little bit more depth. But I feel like I would rather see someone make the page and blow up the way you did, doing it by providing that strict value and good content rather than just like an endless stream of shirtless selfies. But there is like you said,
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
there's a healthy
Yeah.
balance for both of it. And
Yeah. I'm not trying to take shirtless selfies, but I'll take,
right.
I'll just have images
Yeah, for sure.
of whether it's me or, just other things. I mean,
Mm.
I did food before, but I just feel like, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm harping on this, but as I've learned, it's important to really pay attention to those details. I think it can go a long way, and it's cool to kind of like pick Devon's brain and have like a little mastermind session to really learn more about the process. Because similarly to you to what you said, I'm starting the YouTube thing as well. Ordered a camera to try to get better footage. So there's definitely levels to growing a brand and then making it successful. So ultimately, you can do what you're passionate about, and you don't have to kind of kick back to a corporate route. Sorry for those of you listening. I think
Right.
my neighbor's dog is howling, so we might pick that up in the background. Not sure if you heard that, Devon. But
Only faintly.
right. I was like, I promise, guys, someone is not captured in the closet of my apartment. It's the dog. I really appreciate your insight into growing the brand and kind of what your next steps for your profession are, for sure. And I kind of want to get into the fun stuff, at least for me, and where I'll really be able to learn a lot from the conversation is the nutrition and plant-based lifestyle that you've adopted. So I guess my
Right.
question is, what initially led you down that path?
Right. So, I the story starts really with my friend going vegan. I had a close friend who was a heavy meat eater go vegan. He's not even vegan anymore, but he went vegan, and he did it overnight. And I had never even really considered heavily making that switch lifestyle wise. I had another friend who was vegetarian growing up, who had kind of put in seeds in my mind that I might go vegetarian, but I loved meat way too much. But after my friend who loved meat went vegan, it became like possible. Like, okay, maybe I could try it. And what I did in order to try it, and by the way, I wanted to try it. It was like a little bit as a more like a health experimentation thing, but also knowing that maybe the things that are going back in the background are unideal. So like it'd be like beneficial for me to cut back on some of these foods. So I went onto YouTube and I really just typed in like factory farming, and I just forced myself to watch that video in order to motivate me to actually stick to it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I had watched a clip on basically just pig factory farming. It showed how intelligent pigs are, and it showed how they're pretty comparable to dogs, and then it cut to showing the reality of the majority of pigs that are factory farmed in this country, and that kind of struck a chord with me. And I realized like if I could avoid contributing to this, then I wanted to. And I really 20 minutes into the video actually threw away all the meat I had. And that day I went vegetarian. I was still eating eggs and dairy for 6 months because another weird part of the story is I was allergic to fruit and nuts. So my whole life I was allergic to fruits and nuts. So going vegan wasn't really an option. I just went vegetarian instead. At least in my mind, it wasn't an option. But in a way, I really can't explain or why. Like I don't know the reasoning why. But 4 months into vegetarian, I lost my fruit and nut allergy, And that's when I realized, oh, now I actually I can go vegan, I can go plant-based. And, I looked into the egg and dairy industries as well, looked at like the reality for those things. And I went vegan and I never looked back. So short story, it was for ethical purposes. I am vegan for the animals mainly.
It's one of those industries that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I feel like in the future, there definitely will be policy changes, but that might not be for a while because it's just such a big and like prosperous industry. What are your thoughts? Do you think that like the big companies that, farm chickens, farm eggs, do you think that they would ever be forced to adhere to more ethical practices on a policy basis, or do you ever see that happening?
Okay, so that's something that's pretty deep to unpack. I will try my best though. There's so many things rushing through my mind right now. So here's the thing, or here's where I want to start with, I guess. I don't think it's actually even possible, as the human species continues to grow, for us to even, let's say, granted, because a lot of vegans, and I usually sometimes make this argument as well, that there's really no ethical way to kill an animal, but let's just granted say there is an ethical way to kill an animal, and we want to just do it nicely. We don't want to have like this factory farming, the most cruel things that you see in like a vegan documentary, factory farming stuff going on, and you just want to change the policy to change that. Is that even possible? I don't think it is, because our demand for meat is so high. So especially in the United States, for example, we eat so much meat, and over 70% of this meat, I think it's way higher than that actually, is factory farmed meat. And I think it really depends on the animal. It's probably over 70% for cows. I'm sorry. For chickens, it's like over 90%.
Right.
So the thing is, how this is a consequence. What you see when you look at the factory farming videos of these animals being treated in terrible, unethical ways, that's a consequence of the demand and trying to maximize on the resources that we have, and the profits that these companies can get. Because if you try to switch all those, let's say the only ethical way to do it was to do like grass-fed, like pasture-raised animals.
Right.
We eat too much meat to do that for all those factory farmed animals. We don't even have enough land in the United States to take all those animals in factory farms and put them on pasture raised. So you're basically put in a situation where either we cut back on meat, or we continue to factory farm. Like, we don't have enough land to ethically raise all these animals. So when you look at those two things, I think the only hope for the future, if meat eating continues at the same, like it doesn't really decrease enough, the only hope for the future is like lab grown meat, which is going to have a lot of pushback by people who are very naturalist.
Right.
But so I think that kind of summarizes my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
But going, let me just add on to that. Even with the grass-fed, people who like me, who really care about these animals, even if you do pasture raise, you still have animals who they're killed as soon as they're big enough to be killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they grow very quickly. So a cow lives 20 years, but even if you do a nice grass-fed pasture-raised cow, you're going to kill it at 2 years old.
Right.
So you're still raising animals and killing them early.
Yeah.
And a lot of vegan people still say that's obviously unethical, considering, which is a big if, considering that we don't need them. So,
True.
And that's a whole nother part of the discussion. Like, do we need some level of meat consumption or animal product consumption to be healthy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's like I said, it's going to be an educational one for me. I really didn't know that. Like, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Just the sheer amount of land mass doesn't add up to the amount that's being consumed. So then kind of shifting gears from that, since you've become like completely plant-based, what do you see as some of like the biggest advantages and disadvantages of that lifestyle?
Yeah. So in terms of disadvantages, because I guess that list is shorter and easier to go through.
Mm-hmm.
The only disadvantage is the fact that most of the disadvantages of going vegan are the social disadvantages.
Okay.
You're now kind of you're kind of now a weird minority in society where you eat in this way that a lot of people don't understand. It's, going, especially at first, the world keeps changing, and like now it feels like every restaurant has something I can eat. But when at first it was like, if you want to go out with your friends, now you have to make sure that there's a vegan option there, or now your friends feel pressured to like find a restaurant that has vegan options for you. That's the real disadvantage. If we want to talk more like in the health disadvantage, I think in my context, for example, of building muscle, and gaining weight, which was my main goal, the reason a plant-based diet is a disadvantage, if it is a disadvantage at all, is just because of the fiber content. So because plant foods are so filled with fiber, you feel more satiated more easily, which is why it's great for losing weight. But the counter to that is if you're trying to eat in a caloric surplus consistently, it can feel a little bit harder if you don't know what you're doing. So if you don't know, like, the tips and tricks to, I guess, more comfortably get in a caloric surplus. But even when I was an omnivore, eating as much as I needed to eat to gain weight was still required effort too then. But I would say it's a little bit more effort on a vegan diet. It's not protein. Protein is not doesn't make the list at all for me. But I guess still commonly people will assume that maybe that might be a disadvantage.
Right. Yeah.
And then advantages. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's the one that I hear people levy the most is, oh, I don't know how I would possibly get enough protein. But a lot of literature recommends if you can get 0.8 grams per kilogram of lean body mass, that you're still gonna be able to gain muscle. And that's really not that much protein. Of course, there's an argument that like more protein can help, but if you can make it work and it aligns with your values and it has other potential health benefits, then I think it's completely valid.
Yeah, I don't think any benefit that protein over 0.8 grams per pound of body weight offers, or I think it's negligible, especially when you compare it to any advantages you might get from other other things. I mean, a lot of people, for example, I know people will increase their protein content beyond what is necessary for protein synthesis just because they believe it'll like increase their metabolism and keep them satiated. But fiber does that too.
Yeah, like you said.
So
Yep. Yeah, I would argue that fiber probably does it more as well. And it's cheap.
Yeah.
I would bet that it would be cheaper as well.
Right.
Interesting.
Exactly. So hitting 0.8 grams per pound on a plant-based diet, some people go even lower than that, they go 0.6, has never been an issue for me at all, especially if I do a scoop of protein powder every day. Now it's even easier.
Yeah.
So
real quick before you get onto the advantages, because I know there's a bunch of those, I know like some of the classic examples are like lentils and beans, mixing several types of incomplete and complete proteins to make, that. But what are some of your go-to protein sources?
So let me start with the protein sources before I address the incomplete stuff. My main protein source at first for a while was chickpeas. Like I ate so many chickpeas. Now it's more balanced. I use chickpeas and other legumes, of course, chickpeas and lentils and black beans, and the meat substitutes like tofu, which everyone knows, but some people might be a little bit less familiar with tempeh, and even more people might be unfamiliar with seitan. which is probably the leanest vegan protein source, is seitan.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, seitan is the highest vegan protein. It's made from vital wheat gluten. It's basically the protein from wheat, and it's extremely high in protein. It's probably the only vegan source that's comparable to like a lean piece of chicken breast. Like that's how high in protein it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so seitan, tofu, tempeh, legumes. And then you get extra protein from the grains like quinoa and brown rice, and a little bit extra protein from nuts and seeds. I wouldn't count those as main sources, more just like supplementary sources, because per calorie, they're not that great. But
right.
When you add all of that up, you'll probably get enough, and you can throw a protein powder in. You'll definitely get enough. And then going back to the incomplete thing, like I think it's so I think the idea of complete proteins, even though there's like a little bit of truth to it, like some foods really do have a lower amount of a certain amino acid than others, essential amino acid. But the thing is that because it's, you know, a combination of everything you eat in the day, and a lot of plant foods still have pretty good amounts of all nine. Like never do I think anyone needs to consciously track like, oh, I need to combine black beans with brown rice because the black beans are high in lysine, but the brown rice is low in lysine, and the black beans are because it doesn't make any sense from a pragmatic sense to me. Because if you eat enough calories for the day, and you don't literally just sit and eat only potatoes or like only white rice or something like that, crazy like that, you're gonna get all the amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the classic example of black beans and brown rice, like because black beans have more protein per calorie, even those amino acids that make black beans incomplete, it still has more of that amino acid per calorie than the brown rice because it's more concentrated in protein overall. So it has less amino acid per gram of protein, but it has more protein per calorie. So amino acid per calorie, it actually has more. So it doesn't make any sense. The only time it makes sense is when you're trying to make like a vegan protein powder and like you want to create a really nice balanced amino acid profile. So you would take like brown rice protein isolate, and you would take, another like pea protein isolate, and you combine those, and now it's more balanced because you're looking at just the protein. But when you look at the food as its entirety and combining that with looking at your entire day of eating, it doesn't make any sense. I've been looking into this so long trying to make it make sense, mm-hmm. but it doesn't make any sense. That's why I made a whole post on it, because I was being driven crazy by this idea of incomplete protein.
Right. I like it. I saw that smile on your face when I said that. I was like, oh yeah, you about to drop some knowledge on that one. But for sure, man, I respect that. Your amino acids. Not a lot of people know that. And like you said, just from like a practical standpoint, like trying to track each one, it would just be like, you don't have enough mental bandwidth for that to do it.
Yeah. I literally tried to make a day of plant-based eating where you hit the calories where you were deficient in an amino acid. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't do it unless I made it something ridiculous, like just oil and potatoes and, like junk food or something. Like, yeah. I couldn't make a diet that had like, it was very difficult.
That's really cool. So yeah. Two questions that just came to my mind. The first one, and of course, I feel like you have to take this with a grain of salt because the media tries to put a spin on everything. But I remember seeing.
Absolutely.
What was that?
I said absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
For the media. I agree with you.
I felt like I saw a headline a while back about a lot of like vegan protein powders having like heavy metals. Why would they do that? Or is that even true?
I'm not like the most, I didn't realize that vegan proteins have more heavy metals than other proteins. I do make sure that when I choose a protein that it's heavy metal tested. So the protein I use is heavy metal tested. But I actually have no idea about the the details on why that is the case.
Okay. Like you said,
Interesting, but
it's probably not even just the vegan protein powder. It's probably like a lot of protein powders have that issue, and they just kind of on the vegan one because like I think it was like Vega or I'm not sure how you say it, Vega or Vega. That brand.
I hate Vega.
Vega. Yeah, they seem to be kind of like the biggest one that I see advertised, and of course, like with that, you don't typically get the quality compared to like brands that try to do things the right way versus brands that are just out for money. So that makes a little bit.
Vega is the most expensive for the quality of vegan proteins that I know of. I don't know how it became the mainstream one. It's kind of like how Daiya became the mainstream cheese, but it's kind of terrible.
Right.
I don't know why.
Yeah. That's funny. So you mentioned several good sources of protein for vegans. Do you feel like with those sources of protein, are they typically, except for the one that you mentioned, which was seitan, correct?
Yeah, seitan.
Seitan, okay. So do you feel like the other ones, do you have to like sacrifice a macronutrient? Like, are you getting high fat for high protein or like high carbs for high protein? Is that kind of how it works? Yeah, but you just have to factor that in throughout your day. I'm taking it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think of it as a sacrifice. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these things are essential, right? So, legumes are a good example for answering this question, right? I always tell people legumes are a great source of protein, but they're 65% carbohydrate by calorie. So that scares people. It's like, oh, but I'm getting all these carbs just for this little bit of protein. And yeah, that's true. A plant-based diet is very high in carbohydrates. In fact, like the most common macro like nutrient result I get from a day of eating plant-based is about 60% carbohydrate, for example. Right. But so it really just depends on it depends on your goals. So if you're trying to get like 30% of your calories from protein because you're on a very high level like cut or something and you just believe that that's what you need, and you want to do that on a vegan diet, then beans might not be the best option of protein because they're only, there's only so much protein per calorie or so much, carbs per gram of protein.
Yeah.
Seitan is the best example of a vegan source of protein, which is like entirely, it's 75% protein. It's the same like makeup as a protein powder. That's how much protein is in there. Tofu is actually a little bit higher in fat. Tofu has, I'm just going off the top of my head right now, I think it's like 40% fat by calorie and then like 35% protein. Same with tempeh. And then like nuts and seeds, I always say that nuts and seeds I don't consider those good sources of protein. I just consider them good, healthy sources of fat, because to get, 5 grams of protein from almonds, you're getting so many grams of fat, so many calories. So I would never consider almond a main vegan source of protein. But when you combine all of these things together, like if you combine tofu with black beans, the tofu is a little bit higher in fat, the beans are a little bit higher in carb, but then you combine them and now you have a pretty okay macronutrient balance.
Yeah, for sure.
So especially if you just lower your bar for how much protein, if you really go off of just the 0.8 grams or 0.6 to 0.8 is what I usually say, grams of protein per pound, then even with these lower sources of protein, you can still usually hit what you need within your calorie, depending on how big the deficit is, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that definitely clears up some of the things that my kind of superstitions or, the stuff that I associated with a plant-based diet. And I feel like if you take it at face value and you see, what did you say, a legume is like 60% carbohydrate? Yeah.
Right.
If you just see that, you're like, oh, that's pretty high. But then again, you have to factor in the thing that your diet is very satiating. So you're not going to be just inhaling that after a while. Like, you're going to feel full. So I think it all kind of like balances out, which is something that I definitely.
It's all about. Yeah, carbs is a whole nother topic that probably shouldn't even go into, but like it drives me crazy how people like put like the idea to put like beans and like vegetables into the same category of carbs as like bread and pasta.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. And it's because of that fiber. It's because you have the insoluble and soluble fiber both making you feel more full and slowing the absorption rate of, you know, those carbohydrates in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's like completely different.
Right. Yeah, man. I knew I was going to learn stuff today. That's cool. So another one of my questions, something that I had thought about, we kind of briefly hit on this, but how would you address the argument that it's hard to gain muscle on a plant-based diet? Like, obviously you did, from when you first started to now, but what would you counter that argument with?
It is hard to gain muscle on a plant-based diet if you've never eaten plant-based before and you don't understand plant-based food and well enough to realize how you should be eating it. But once you do,
drop the mic.
You know, it isn't, you know. So the principles of gaining weight and gaining muscle is the exact same on a plant-based diet as it is for a standard traditional diet. You know, you got to be in a caloric surplus. That's the most important thing. And there's no reason you can't get into a caloric surplus on plant foods at all. Just, you know, eat some calorically dense foods like avocados and such, nuts and, you know, grains, oats, whatever. And then, you know, get enough protein for muscle growth. We already talked about that. So, and when you're eating higher calorie, it's even easier to get that 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, because you're, you know, if you're eating more, that's more opportunity to get that protein in. So, you know, it's harder if you don't know what you're doing. Is it actually objectively harder to any amount? When comparing just a plant-based person who knows what he's doing and an omnivore who knows what they're doing, is there going to be some disadvantage for the plant-based person? I'm going to say I'm agnostic about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference is at least negligible, or it's over-exaggerated.
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah,
I'm not closed-minded to the idea that maybe it's a little bit easier with a non-plant-based diet, but I haven't been proven that.
Right.
And obviously myself, my anecdotal evidence with myself is obviously making me biased to believe that it's complete BS.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, like, honesty and you know, open-mindedness, because I feel like people with diets, especially if, I don't know if you have Twitter, but if you get into like the Twitter diet cult, those are some arguments. People will just go.
Twitter is the most toxic for opinions.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's brutal.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's another reason, going off a little bit topic, it is another reason why I try to grow my influence as well, is not only do I want to encourage people who are not plant-based to become more plant-based, I want to encourage the vegans who are vegan to, and I haven't done this to the full extent that I'm going to, I really want to encourage them to become less cult-like, less dogmatic, a little bit less of an ideology, and, you know, bring it back to like why and the values and stuff like that, and you know, not being, you know,
yeah, man,
annoying people.
yeah, I think there's definitely a spot to do that, and that would be a cool way to move the brand forward for you as well. So yeah, definitely be on the lookout for that. What did your like your muscle growth in, because it seemed like you went through, like, I saw like a before and after on your page, when you first started, you know, like exercising, hitting the weights and whatnot. Like, how much weight did you gain, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I went from 100, you know, like 43 pounds to 170 pounds.
That's solid.
So I gained a significant amount of weight. Now, there's a little bit of backstory that was in the span of a year. But there's a little bit of backstory to that is that I was originally 150 pounds. I went to study abroad and I lost a lot of weight studying abroad, walking around just not having as many food options. So I lost a little bit of weight, which I then gained back immediately after like a month of going back to the gym. So I gained that first, 7 pounds, and then the next 15 to 20 pounds was for the rest of that year, which is pretty, I think, standard for someone who's really focused and is, getting beginner gains, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But I at no point felt like my plant-based diet was slowing down that process at all. It seemed, I had tried weightlifting and trying to gain muscle like back in high school and such, and it wasn't any easier or harder than that. Yeah. And I think the benefit of doing it plant-based, or at least more plant-based, if not all the way plant-based, is that you don't feel like you're sacrificing any part of your health to get those calories and get those results, because a lot of the foods are healthy, low in saturated fat and such. So
definitely. Yeah, I feel like that's right on par with the course for any beginner that adheres to a normal omnivore diet. So yeah, I think it just goes to prove your point. Like, you definitely can put on lean mass, and it's not no harder than having that meat diet. Where did you study abroad, just out of curiosity?
Oh, I went to France.
Yeah.
But I was traveling all around Europe.
Right.
It was much harder to keep a plant-based diet up when you're traveling from country to country, especially in a big group, and you don't want everybody else to have to find a vegan option for you. It was already actually hard to find a vegetarian option. So
yeah, that's what my question was going to be. Like, do you feel like, so from what it sounds like, European countries make it a little bit more difficult to adhere to a plant-based diet?
Completely depends on the country and how rural you are.
Okay.
So usually the more urban you are, the more vegan friendly it gets, and the more rural, the least vegan. So if we go to a place that's a little bit more rural in Europe, then that's going to make it harder. And then also, it's just some countries are friendlier than others. The UK is just as good as the United States in terms of vegan options. Budapest and Berlin and maybe even and Belgium, or all of Belgium, the parts I went to, Brussels and Bruges, they were all vegan friendly. And then like the worst was like when I went to like Austria, Salzburg, Austria, and like Spain was actually pretty hard too. I went to Barcelona, Spain, and it was a little bit harder to find. I don't think that was actually representative of how hard it is, but when you're just going and you don't know anything, and you're just walking around, then it was hard. So
yeah, there's definitely a lot of barriers. So, whether it be like the language, just being in a completely foreign environment, having to like be with a group, like you said. So yeah, that's interesting. I've always wondered.
And it was another interesting thing I've realized about when it comes to countries and their vegan friendliness. A lot of the developed countries, which are the most vegan friendly, are the ones that have the most terrible animal welfare practices. So the UK, the United States, and Australia are actually the most vegan friendly, but they're also the worst in terms of animal welfare. And I think that's connected because when people see what's going on to make their food, they're more likely to have the counter response to that.
Yeah, that's a dynamic I never would have thought about. I mean, obviously in the United States, it's pretty apparent, but
yeah.
So one more question that I had for you, and we kind of talked about like the media slant earlier, but I feel like there's been just a slew of documentaries, especially on like Netflix comes to mind. A couple that I have seen are the one that's more recent, I believe, called Game Changers, and then the one that's it's a couple years old, I think, What the Health. What are your thoughts on those overall?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag of emotions and thoughts when it comes to those documentaries. Like, first of all, documentaries are documentaries. They're not evidence for anything. Like a documentary, most documentaries, or a lot of them, they come in with the purpose of trying to prove their narrative. So of course you're going to have a biased, you're going to have some bias in there. You're going to have some over exaggeration in there, because they're trying to prove their point. What the Health is a example of a documentary where it was obvious to me that there were claims in there that were overblown or like misrepresented, and the reason it's conflicting for me is because so many people went vegan because of these documentaries. Like it's this balance between one of my highest values is truth and accuracy, and I have the other value of reducing suffering in the world, including for the animals. So is it worth that? Oh, these documentaries like What the Health, like exaggerate a little bit, cause a lot of people to go vegan. It's actually kind of difficult for me, but I don't ever reference a documentary to support anything I say, and I don't think any vegans should, because but I do think even there's still an 80% truth to these documentaries. Game Changers was a lot better. I enjoyed Game Changers, but it's still, obviously they're trying to promote a plant-based lifestyle. The people who make these documentaries who want to promote a plant-based lifestyle. So yeah, it's like the question of, are these documentaries good for veganism is something, and like the movement of creating a more plant-based world. That's something I think about a lot, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that, because I think for the long-term success of creating a more plant-based world, it has to be rooted in absolute facts and truth and realities. We can't root it in over-exaggerations, because those are eventually going to be unveiled, and then it's going to make people feel like the whole thing is bullshit or discredit the whole thing.
Right.
So,
yeah, man, I like your.
But I've never had any documentary create more vegans than What the Health. So.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, a mixed bag. But I like your stance, man, of like the facts, and because I feel like if you're relying on those kind of like they appeal a lot to emotion with some exaggerations, and it's been discredited. I feel like if you play the long game and convince people with the cold hard truth, it'll have that lasting effect. So I like that. And another thing I heard once again on Twitter, a lot of people argue like, oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger never would have been Arnold Schwarzenegger if he did the plant-based diet. I'm like, okay, but that was like 1960s and 1970s. Like today, I feel like with all of the different food options and supplements that we have, like he might have been able to make it work in 2020. Whereas back then, I don't know if they had as many things available, but I felt like that was another argument.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. He probably also might have not had a heart attack.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think with all the resources in 2020, that it's much more likely that he could have achieved the same thing. But I don't know any. I mean, are you familiar with like Nimai Delgado as one of the bigger like vegan bodybuilders? He's achieved a pretty.
I'll have to look into it. What was his name?
Nimai Delgado, Nimia Delgado. He's one of the, he used to bodybuild. He's not bodybuilding professionally anymore in the last 2 years, but he's a good, and there's many other examples of vegan bodybuilders. Maybe they're not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they really do represent the diet well.
Yeah.
In terms of what is possible. So.
Sure. So with the documentaries kind of off the table, what are some good sources that you would recommend to people that are looking to learn more about vegan and plant-based, or other than what, like what your process was when you were first learning?
It really depends on that person's motivations for even being interested in the first place.
Mm.
There's so many reasons to be interested in eating plant-based in the first place. Maybe you're concerned about animal welfare, which I know a lot of people who stick to veganism are, then now I think it is worth it to watch some of what the awful things that happen in these industries. And, you know, those are good for documentaries.
Right.
But if you're coming at it from, you know, a health perspective, like you have maybe you have high cholesterol or something, and maybe you just feel for some reason that you'll benefit from health-wise from a plant-based diet, then, you know, there's plenty of good books. I prefer books to documentaries if, you know, if someone's not going to look directly into research and like, because that's hard, obviously, just go through studies and figure out whether you should.
Yeah.
You know, there's plenty of good books. There's a book called Fiber Fueled, which just came out, which I really enjoyed. There's a book called How Not to Die, which is made by Dr. Greger, and How Not to Diet, which actually I prefer more than How Not to Die. Mastering Diabetes. I'm forgetting the author's name. But so those are some good starting books. In terms of like, if you don't need any more evidence, but you just want to know how to do it, then, you know, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, there's so many resources on how to eat vegan. I mean, you can follow pages like mine, but you could also just, you know, buy a vegan recipe book, go through it and see, like, make some things, find the things you enjoy. And over time you will have like this, you know, this selection of vegan meals. And then eventually it'll be much easier to just make all your meals vegan. That's how I started. I had a recipe book that I pretty much everything I cooked was out of that. And then that kind of became the foundation for everything I made and how I flavored food after that.
Right.
So, yeah. And then if you're going, I mean, I guess some people go vegan for just strictly environmental reasons too, but, which is why the documentary Conspiracy plays a big part in that. But that one also, and, you know, it's kind of like the environmental veganism version of What the Health. Okay. But there's really important facts in there, and they display it well, but then they over exaggerate some things, and then it kind of like, so it's like, but I still on average would recommend someone watch it with a skeptical mind at least, because it'll open your eyes to some things that you probably didn't realize about the sustainability of how much meat we're eating. Right.
Well, yeah, man, I think I really appreciate, once again, you coming on and spitting your truth. I learned, so I have a little paper with a whole bunch of notes on it. And I think, like, my audience as well will learn quite a bit from this. I know we talked about your Instagram, Plant Fueled Strength. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to plug for people to check out your stuff and support you?
So for right now, it's just at Plant Fueled Strength. I'll be starting on YouTube next month, but I don't even know if I'm going to still go under the name of Plant Fueled Strength or not for that. So just Plant Fueled Strength for now.
Awesome.
And then if anyone's interested in switching to a plant-based diet, or, you know, wants coaching, they can just DM me on Plant Fueled Strength or go to plantstrengthperformance.com.
Gotcha. So we got Plant Fueled Strength and
plantstrengthperformance.com. That's where I have teamed up with some other coaches, and we're offering our coaching services. You know, you can go to coaching and select Devon if you wanted to be coached by me. And yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, man. Enjoyed it.
Listening. And I will catch you in the next episode, guys.